Welcome to this week's episode of Insight. During this week's show, we're going to cover the boycott and the blockage of Armenian goods from entering Russia, our natural gas dependence on that country. Then we're going to move on to talk about the partial opening of the Azeri and Turkish rail networks to Armenia, and then we will close with some other business-related news. The Russian state has been blockading many Armenian products on fictitious reasons, on goods ranging from cognac, flowers, to most importantly, seasonal fruit that are most affected by timelines. This is obviously in response to Armenia's shift towards the US and the EU. All of these restrictions are a violation of the Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union rules, which we are currently a member of. This is having and will have a greater impact on our agricultural producers the longer it goes on. This will, in real terms, bite and hurt the poorest people in our country. This is a trade war in which we are in no way ready for, given our over-reliance on the Russian market. In response to this, our government has stepped up by offering subsidies to farmers to make up for the loss of exports to Russia. At the same time, the EU has also stepped up to pick up some of these exports that are not going to Russia, and they've actually lowered tariffs and are making an active effort to buy from Armenia, and even non-EU countries like Ukraine are doing their part. This is all very good. However, when you're talking about, depending on who's counting, a couple of $100 million to $1 billion in exports, they cannot be replaced by token economic gestures. The problem with exporting our goods to the EU in the long term is actually far more structural, is that many of our products are not up to standards. And the EU has very strict regulatory standards, which many of our exporters are not actually used to meeting. Standards they're not used to meeting. And at the same time, it's also an issue of shelf space. You can actually enter a market, but that doesn't mean there's supermarkets that are willing to allow you to sell to them or to use their shelf space to actually market your products. All of this could actually lead to the first steps in us diversifying our export market, which is something we need to do. But if anyone has any illusions this is going to be painless or not very problematic, they're deluding themselves. Looming in the background of this trade war with Russia is actually our natural gas dependency on Russia. This is actually our point of greatest dependency on items or products coming from Russia, is because 80% of our natural gas is actually imported from Russia. The rest of it comes from Iran as part of a barter deal. In the context of a trade war, this will be the nuclear option for Russia. Because they'll have multiple options. One is to actually cut off the gas, which is not very likely, and the other one is actually to raise prices. And actually, if they raise prices to world standards, this is, depending on who's counting, a $500 million to $1 billion hit to our economy. It's not likely for them to cut off the natural gas because that will be burning the last bridges here, but I can definitely see them raising prices. In short, that Armenia really has no alternatives to natural gas from Russia, because the only other realistic short-term alternatives would be from Iran, and they're actually having supply issues themselves, especially after the war. And gas from Azerbaijan is essentially, one, non-existent because their capacities aren't there to actually be able to export to us, and obviously politically is a non-starter. The only actual real alternative to Russian gas is actually Turkmen gas, because the Turkmen have actually pipelines that go through Iran. But that raises its own political problems because it'll require US waivers, and there will be intense pressure from Russia on Turkmenistan not to do that, but they have massive gas reserves. So the options are there, but in the short run, this is the greatest point of our vulnerability in our relationship with Russia. Now let's move on and discuss the partial opening of the Azeri and Turkish rail networks to Armenian importers and exporters. Let's start with the Azeri side first. Almost every day it's trumpeted in the press that there was fertilizer or oil or wheat coming in mostly from Kazakhstan or Russia that passed through the Azeri rail networks on their way to Armenia. The reality is this is far more about politics than about commerce. These imports are not even 1% of what we import to our country. In real terms, it actually makes almost no difference whether these goods travel through the Azeri rail networks or are brought in on trucks or rail directly from Georgia via Russia and other places. These goods, we've had this traffic for 25 years without any problems. So this variance of using the Azeri rail network is a very marginal issue. Now let's move on to the Turkish rail network. It was announced with a lot of fanfare a couple of weeks ago that the Turkish rail network is actually open for Armenian importers and exporters. And in real terms, it's actually importers because we hardly export anything to Turkey. What does this mean in real terms? In real terms, it means that the Turkish exporters, they used to lie about the final destination of the product. They used to write Georgia. Now they can be honest about the final destination of the product and write Armenia. That's pretty much the only thing that changes, minus a complete opening of the borders and specifically rail networks into Turkey. This is something that this is a very small but symbolic first step, but much more than that. We realistically are not likely to see an opening of the border anytime soon because of political considerations and pressure from Baku. So all of these things like this are greatly exaggerated by our government and our EU friends to show that there's actually progress when they know that the border is actually not likely to open, and what we have right now is what we're likely to have. The efforts of this government to actually open the border with Turkey have been commendable, but so far, if we're being fair about it, they've been a complete failure. Now we'll close with discussing the expansion of Armenian data center company's Firebird expansion into new markets, in this case, Kazakhstan. The Kazakh government has inked a $10 billion deal with the U.S. chip-making giant NVIDIA and an Armenian-American cloud company, Firebird, to develop a data center valley in the country's northern Pavlodar region. The deal is seen as anchoring a broader effort to turn Kazakhstan into a global digital hub. Kazakhstan recently adopted a development strategy called the Digital Kazakhstan to guide the country's transformation into a cognitive economy by 2029. For those of you who don't know, Firebird is actually the company that's setting up the multi-billion-dollar data center in Armenia, which they're in the process of building. And what we're actually seeing them is actually becoming the company that everyone's working with to actually expand regionally. This is a great achievement. Here you have an Armenian company that is a facilitator in bringing data centers to our greater region, in this case, to the most important country in Central Asia, all the while partnering and working with the most valuable company in the world, in this case, which is NVIDIA. The future in our region will be far more Armenian than people think. Thank you for joining me in this week's episode of Insights.
Come on.